Peter Renner, who returns to us from coming with us the last year or two. He's now got a new role. He's an enterprise technology strategist for Microsoft's healthcare account technology unit. He's based here in Irvine, California, and he's responsible for developing the strategy and overseeing the implementation of secure, compliant, and reliable enterprise data center solutions through leveraging private, public, and hybrid clouds. So he's kind of in the heart of it, and Peter's done an awesome job assembling a team for us today. So let me first introduce you to Nicole Chandler, who's an information services and technology professional with a strong focus on healthcare solutions with Precision Diagnostics in San Diego, California, just down the road in one of my favorite places to visit. And as a solutions architect, she's been leading the implementation of a customized laboratory information management system, a fully integrated healthcare billing software platform, and worked on the team responsible for the migration on-premises IT infrastructure to the Azure cloud, as well as the company-wide launch and adoption of the Microsoft Office 365. And then along with Nicole, she's joined by her colleague, Jay Dawkins, who is a fine dresser, and he appreciates my leather shoes. So even if he didn't know anything, I would think he was wonderful, but these actually has been in the same wealth of IT health administration for 15 years, and he's been part of the team that's leading those and other migrations. And so in addition, it's just particularly nice that he appreciates my shoes, so I had to accommodate him for that too. And then we have Jim Richardson. And Jim Richardson is at the forefront of the fastest moving technology industry trend on cloud services as well. He's spent the past 7 years evangelizing the industry-wide shift to the cloud and has helped position Microsoft as a leader in commercial public cloud space. A calculated risk taker with a touch of technology knowledge, I bet more than a touch. He's championed cloud services to his enterprise and SMB customers. And last but not least in any way, we have the king of healthcare technology at Microsoft, right there alongside with Peter, Hector Rodriguez. And you know, Hector's kind of been there. We were comparing notes, and we've been at the same parties. He is the National Director and CTO for Microsoft's U.S. Health and Life Sciences Industry Group. As a member of the group's leadership team, he focuses on the development and deployment of the go-to-market health IT solutions for security, compliance devices, and overall industry strategy. His team works with healthcare customers and partners to drive IT and the healthcare industry as a strategic business service that enables cost reductions while improving the patient experience, access, and overall quality of care in a secure and compliant environment. And let me add, I have had an opportunity to visit with him, and you know, many people that move up the ladder, they get too important to actually know this stuff. He rocks. So you guys, I'm in the process of trying to see again if we're going to migrate our secured system, because I have my own highly secured private tower of power that Peter has known me since way back when and has been involved in off and on across the years, and I'm going through the same decision. So it was a little bit self-serving that I thought we should have this, and I'm looking forward to hearing it. Let's welcome our panel and sit back to have a really good presentation.
Thank you, Cindy. And before we go through the customer presentation, I'm going to go through a brief overview of some cybersecurity attacks and what we're seeing out in the area today, then transition to the customer panel. Before I start, who in the audience has received one of those great letters from a company saying you get a free year of identity threat protection because of a breach they've had in their company? Anyone? Wow. I received 8 last year. I received a certified letter from the IRS because my tax returns were filed on my behalf by a hacker. And they took about $10,000 of a return, and the IRS was seeking reunification for me. So that was a fun letter to receive at the very, very least. So for me, this is very personal, and it's been something that I've been doing for a while, and I just want to make sure that we share some best practices and then talk about what our customers are doing today. Anyways, let's briefly talk about how cybersecurity attacks are changing today. You know, first of all, as many of you are in the audience aware, the easiest way of getting to a facility is using a compromised credential. I'll show you a stat later on in the presentation about how easy it is to get credentials, but from an overall aspect, getting into a system using someone's compromised credentials takes seconds. It doesn't take minutes, doesn't take years, doesn't take months, it's seconds. So if you have keys to the kingdom, it's easy to get in. The second piece of it is a lot of our hackers and a lot of people who are compromising systems are using tools you have installed currently, and then as they leave your company, they're hiding or masking their trail. I recently talked to a customer that had a breach occurred. The data that was going out of their company was leaving looking like Amazon traffic. So if you're a security analyst, you'd see Amazon traffic going out, you wouldn't think it's a big deal. But in this case, it was gigabytes of data, which should cause a flag. The other piece of it is they're staying in our systems for 6 to 8 months. That's really, really scary. Imagine having someone with ill intent living in your house for 6 to 8 months, watching what you eat, watching how you sleep, how you do work, who you communicate. And all throughout the time, you have no idea what's going on. And the challenge is, even though we're trying to do a good job, when these breaches happen, it impacts our companies, it impacts jobs and other things like that. Cindy mentioned in the healthcare summit, there are fines from $700 to $1,000 to even lower because of poorly patched systems and due to other fines and other breaches that have occurred. And these fines are 3-4 years old, so the fines have not caught up to modern day risks that we're seeing today. Shortly before this presentation, Symantec and Verizon issued their 2016 breach reports. Now, well, this is an eye chart, and I'm not going to go through all of it. What I want to do is call out some key items for your review. This deck will be available for download later, so please let's not focus too much time on this. But what I want you to see is the veracity of attacks that are going on, the sheer volume of attacks that are happening. From a crypto ransomware attack, about 1,000 attacks occur a day. If you look at the malware pieces, 430 million unique malware pieces were created last year. And these malware pieces are becoming more and more sophisticated as they're able to fool our virtual machines that look in the environments and say, you know what, this is a sandbox. I'm not going to release here. I want to wait till I actually see a real machine before imploding. The other scary piece of this is if you look at the zero-day attacks. Our zero-day attacks have gone up to 55 last week due to a release with Adobe. That's a 125% increase from last year. The challenge we have is, on average, it's about 7 days from the time that a zero-day attack is made public to the time the vendor fixes it. So that puts your companies at risk for about 7 days before you can actually fix it. And hackers are using this information and knowledge to get into your systems very, very easily. And this is whether you're on-premise, hybrid, or in cloud. These facts, these things really don't matter. The last thing I want to point out is last year, 88% of all exploits, all compromises that occurred, happened due to CVEs that are over a year old. Now, many of us have a very good hygiene, make sure we patch our systems, patch our machines, but due to line of business applications and other things where they have to be kept constant, we can't patch them. So we have to figure out ways to make sure we protect those pieces of data and monitor and make sure those don't exploit. Since I focus on healthcare, this slide is heavily focused on healthcare instances. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time since this is a mixed audience. But one thing we need to keep in mind is companies cannot rely upon old ways of protecting their systems. Hackers are becoming very creative on how to get things done, and they're transforming how they do things, and they're keeping one step ahead of us. So we need to be doing things to protect us. I'm going to call it recently about the hospitals that were breached through ransomware. I know that was very frustrating for some folks. It was very, very public, and there's actually news articles talking about how patients can be checked in. So hacking has gone from a kid in the basement having fun, showing off to his friends, to extorting money and now potentially impacting people's lives. So as executives, as cybersecurity professionals, we have to be very, very vigilant on what we're going to do. Okay, hopefully I've not scared you too much. Anyone here just thinking everything's good? Fair enough. What I want you to walk away with today is 3 simple things that you, as IT leadership, as executives, as cybersecurity folks can do to protect your systems. And while it's very easy to say, Microsoft does all these, we have some great partners out in the audience that do these things too. So at the very least, we want to make sure you secure your credentials. because that will eliminate about 66% of a threat vector that you have of getting compromised credentials coming in. Secure email, because through phishing attacks and through other items, it's easy to get credentials from folks. And then last but not least, we need you to assume breach. Because if you do not assume breach, you'll think that your defense in depth systems and other traditional ways of protecting yourself, that you're safe. And sadly, a lot of times companies who do get breached are resting upon the fact of the investments they've made, and unfortunately they do get breached. There's a saying going around on healthcare entities. There's two types of covered entities when it comes to cybersecurity. One who has been breached, and those who don't know they've been breached. And with that, what I want to do is have a panel talk about what they're doing to move to cloud, and then we're also going to talk about some changes that are going on in the industry. Cindy introduced the panel before, but just for clarification, we have Nicole Chandler, Jay Dawkins, Jim Richardson, and Hector Rodriguez. And what I want to do is ask some basic questions and then open to the audience for your feedback and questions and comments. So, Nicole, we'll start with you first. So Precision Diagnostics moved their lab information systems to the cloud about 2 years ago. So as you're considering the move to the cloud, what were factors that you were considering to make sure that you protect your data? And then also, what other things did you consider, whether or not you went on-premise or moved up to the cloud?
Well, as a drug testing laboratory, Precision Diagnostics is in a commodity business. So moving to the cloud, when we made that decision, we took into account the cost and the benefit that we would get from making that move. Basically, in the cloud, we don't have to worry about on-site data center. It's easy to manage, and we're able to maintain an almost always-on environment for our laboratory information management system.
Very good. What about things like HIPAA, data integrity, security, well, those type of things? That must have been a concern for you, as there's a lot of concerns about that.
Absolutely. In the laboratory business, all you are dealing with is protected healthcare information, and protecting that is incredibly important, not only for your reputation, but your day-to-day operations. And using the Office 365 cloud allows us to communicate with our scientists, our clients, and our sales team in a very secured manner. Knowing that we could utilize OneDrive, SharePoint to protect our healthcare information was a huge factor in selecting the move.
Very good. Now, I mentioned one of the stats about unpatched systems, about 0 days and other things like that. So, Jay, let's talk briefly about how you manage the infrastructure, how you take care of it. What do you do to make sure that things work out? Is it different in cloud versus on-premise? How does it happen?
Yeah, it's a bit different. You have a lot more notifications. You have a lot more insight into what's going on. You don't have these phantom systems that no one's aware of. One of the biggest things, to piggyback on what Nicole said, is just our growth. Our growth has been phenomenal, so to be able to scale has just been huge, whereas if we're on-prem, you have a lot more that goes into it versus being in the cloud.
Fair enough. So you don't have to worry about provisioning storage for SANs or other things like that, waiting for POs?
Exactly.
Fair enough. What about from a login? How do you manage to make sure that people are logging proper systems, making sure that you don't have compromised credentials? How do you take care of that? Because I know you have a very diverse remote audience.
Yeah. Again, we have people logging in from all over. We have to stay on top of that, and using the advanced threat analytics, we're able to see not only who's logging in, but see where they're logging in from, and look at the trends if someone travels a lot, or if we see it from a spurious location, we know this is something that'll catch our attention. And so the advanced threat analytics has helped us out greatly with that.
Very cool. So Jim, ISV standpoint, you see a lot of different customers out there. I'm sure you see the good, the bad, the ugly. What's been your experience as you've been dealing with these customers, on-premise, hybrid, cloud, whatever the approach is? And what are some things that you're seeing out in the wild that may be surprising, or some things the audience would like to know about?
So one of the things I wanted to talk about today, and Jay brought it up, was advanced threat analytics. You only get a few alerts with this because it's only looking at your domain controllers and unusual traffic. So it does make it a very easy product to install. You set it and forget it. The cloud does all the analytics and reports back to you. The other product is the Advanced Threat Protection. And this is where a lot of my clients start by putting their toes in the cloud with just email. So they just want to move email first. They don't want to move files. They don't want to go to video conferencing and all that. Just email. And when you have email, you start to have the problems of what comes along with it, attachments and links. So with Advanced Threat Protection, Microsoft puts additional layers of security on your email. Normally, with anti-spam tools, the mail comes in and it gets cleaned for known malware. It compares the malware against a pattern, or it compares the malware against a list of known problems, and it can remove that and quarantine that message. But what about the zero-day attacks like Peter was talking about? What about the innocuous web links that, hey, send us $1,000 for this invoice we never sent you? Or, hey, I'm the president of your company, we need this amount wired to us. I see all that stuff all the time. But what the product will do is two things. The first, with web links, Microsoft actually converts the URL to a safe link. So when the end user gets the email, they can click the safe link, and it takes them to the cloud. There they'll get a message if it's a non-secure link, and it'll say, warning, if you continue, this could infect your computer or cause damage. And then it's up to the user to decide, should I do this or not? If it's a clean link, it just redirects you. So it's a good way to protect your users beyond normal web filtering, because it actually addresses the zero-day attacks. When Microsoft receives the click and converts it to a safe link, their machine intelligence actually tests the link. And if it comes back as bad, then it redirects you to that page. Same thing with attachments. If somebody emails you an attachment, the Advanced Threat Protection will download that attachment before the user gets it and put it into a virtual machine and run it to see if it's actually malicious payload. So it's kind of like the example of you get shipped a box of chocolates to your office and you don't want to try it. You don't know what it is. So you ask somebody else to, hey, go try that chocolate and see if it's good before I eat it. So in this case, Microsoft is that company that's going to take the first piece of chocolate and eat it and see if it's bad or not. If it's good, they'll say, yep, it's good, and they'll send it to you. But if it's bad, they'll take it out and prevent you from seeing it. So Advanced Threat Protection, ATP, Advanced Threat Analytics, ATA. Really good stuff.
Cool, thanks. So Hector, I know you've been with High Trust and other boards helping set standards and everything. Can you tell the audience what has changed across High Trust and other things to help as customers move from...
The biggest change, and I was just reading a HIMSS analytics report, just from 2016, is that healthcare has moved to the cloud. Our data is in the cloud. The IDC research shows that 80% of all healthcare data will go through the cloud in some way, shape, or form within the next few years. Whenever I present that to customers and others, I say, it's already happening. We see it every day. But I wrote down some of the workloads, and so when you're out there in your organization or as a vendor, a partner, speaking to customers, they're going to ask the question about workloads. What's in the cloud? Health insurance exchanges, health information exchanges, very popular cloud models because we were talking, Cindy and I were talking about HIPAA and the beginning days of HIPAA and exchanging messages. That was all being done over private networks through secure FTP sites, some insecure FTP sites, but that's how it all started. Now that data has just been taken to a whole nother level, and that is protected health information, electronic PHI as it's called. What we're also seeing, patient engagement. Now, just about everybody here probably has a healthcare app or a wellness app on their phone, on their devices. Those are all in the cloud. You are in the cloud. I use that example a lot because I still go to companies where the chief information security officer or the CIO says, we will never be in the cloud. And then you ask them, well, how do you send email? Do you have a smartphone? That's all cloud connected. And back to Peter's point, usually that's how malware or other just bad things enter your organization because there's a bit of ignorance or a bit of no, and when your strategy is no, that's just disaster. That's doomsday. So I do want to talk about a couple more workloads to keep your eyes open for Mental health assessment. So everybody says mental health is the big taboo. That data is making its way into the cloud. And when that gets into the cloud, and things like chronic disease or diseases people don't want to talk about, the studies around HIV or infectious diseases, Ebola, that data is being stored in the cloud. It's being studied in the cloud. So big things are getting done in the cloud with data. I know everybody's talking about analytics. A huge opportunity for analytics in the cloud. We're seeing it with the researchers, the genomics organizations. They cannot afford to spin up the level of machine learning or deep learning or diagnostic capabilities that a hyperscale cloud can deliver. And we've seen stories from large research universities where they can spin up 10 or 20,000 servers in a matter of hours, literally for dollars, versus millions of dollars if they were to build a data center with that type of equipment in it. Backup and disaster recovery is a big one. We talked about compute for big data and image storage. So all of us who have any types of dental images, x-rays, any medical images, those are all going to the cloud, because HIPAA law says you've got to store all this stuff for about 6 years. The reality about data, especially our medical data, only about 6 months is relevant to a doctor. They can't read it all. You can't read it all, I can't, but it has to be stored. The law says 6 years. In some states like California, it can be 7 to 10. It's got to be stored somewhere, and the cloud provides very, very cheap storage and data backup environments. Peter, I want to make a couple more comments that were mentioned. One of the things that we find is a big fallacy, and especially about cybersecurity in healthcare, is they think that there's one person who's responsible for it. There isn't. Cybersecurity, privacy and security is everyone's responsibility, and organizations have to change that way. At Microsoft, our security posture begins with our CEO, Satya Nadella. Now, people in the field like myself and Peter and the others here, we also take it from the ground up. We bring back what our customers are asking for, our partners, what we see out in the field. So we meet in the middle, but it is driven from the very top, and that has to happen, but it has to be everybody's responsibility. The other thing that's going on in today's world, one of the things that the cloud allows us to do, and Jay mentioned it, you get to grow really fast and you get to launch new apps and new software all the time. That creates a lot of unpatched and unsupported software. So the old software, no one's keeping their eyes on. And so you've got, these organizations have to adopt this new way of developing software, of deploying software. I know it's a work in progress, and it's great to hear that you guys have been able to leverage it to grow really quickly, because that's exactly what we're seeing, and that's the way the world is going to work moving forward. I use a statement, we call it the cloud today. In a few years, it's just technology. I mean, that's what it is. It's the way things is going to get, the way things are going to get done. And the last thing that I want to mention is, if you go to an organization or your organization itself says, we are HIPAA compliant, we passed our HIPAA audit, that's a really good thing, but HIPAA compliance is not a security strategy. They are not mutually exclusive, they go hand in hand, but every organization should have an enterprise cybersecurity strategy in place. We don't see it. The surveys show that about 20 to 30% of organizations, healthcare covered entities, have one in place. Most employees don't know they have one, if they do. So a lot of opportunity for the people in this industry to really make a difference in this industry, in healthcare.
Thank you very much. Nicole, we were talking offline, and you were mentioning some things that you're doing with the data that you get from these specimens, and how it's beneficial to precision diagnostics.
Absolutely. So at our laboratory, we try to correlate data between a patient's prescribed medication and their history of positive or negative test results. And through that, we monitor diversion and potential negative drug-to-drug interactions. And that provides additional value to our clients, the doctors throughout the nation, who want to zero in on that to make sure that they're providing the best care possible to their patients.
That's awesome. Now, what about for people who are misusing or abusing different opiates and other things? You know, how are you using the knowledge you've built in the cloud to actually start identifying that?
Well, we're leveraging Power BI analytics to, map back to our mass spec data. These are thousands of data points that are coming off our laboratory instruments each day, millions over the months. And by finding trends in a patient's activity of not being positive for a drug that they should be positive for, or vice versa, it helps us feed that information back to the doctor and really help the doctor zero in on that patient's lifestyle, on the choices that they're making, and provide more in-depth care.
Yeah, cool. And also, I remember you talking about how you're identifying what's known as a script doctor. So people are looking to buy opiates, and maybe they just go to a doctor and change part of their name so they can actually get more and more opiates, and they can use it to sell it. So that was a very interesting story you told also about how you're using this data to help both sides of the fence on this. So Jay, you're mentioning that you use advanced threat analytics to look for anomalous logins. Have you been able to identify or catch any interesting trends or anything that helped Precision stay ahead of potentially a breach, or are there any humorous anecdotes that happened because of looking at this data and other things that went with that too?
Yeah, one of the anonymous logins one of the first alerts that we got was actually our CEO, his credentials. And so I'm looking at him, talking to our CIO, and I'm concerned, and we're finding out, hey, we got this alert. Is this legit? And then we find out, yes, it's just that he happens to travel a lot, and so he is using his credentials on multiple machines in these different locations, and it learned over time. So definitely very helpful, very insightful.
So what you're saying is it started off by trying to learn, and as it adapted and learned, it became better and better about filtering out the noise.
Yeah, and we got understanding how it's alerting us, and the frequency of the alerts, and it wasn't that much. So once it learned, it just definitely helped out.
That's awesome. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I also saw something within the first couple of weeks of installing advanced threat analytics that the domain admins of the company were having their passwords sent clear text over LDAP queries to the Active Directory. And these were outdated legacy applications that they configured to use their accounts as service accounts. So, okay, but it was still sending those credentials. So if I go into their lobby and I join their Wi-Fi network and I put on my sniffer, what do you know? I've got domain admin credentials now. So it's good that it caught that right away, things that they didn't know that they were working with for the last 4 or 5 years, just ignorant to it. And by turning this on, it really opened their eyes.
Okay, cool. So I want to open to the audience. I know we talked about a lot of different data points. We talked about examples and other things like that.
Yes. So the name of this panel is Protecting Your Data.
Yes.
And Migrate to the Cloud.
Yes.
So we're talking about healthcare data, healthcare information data that's protected. I haven't heard too much about encryption. Mm-hmm. I haven't heard too much about attribution.
Yes.
I haven't heard too much about anonymizing data that's shared between data brokers for data analytics. So and also I haven't heard much about the cloud service level agreements mm-hmm. that ensure data confidentiality. So I'd like to hear more about how to protect that data as you consider moving it to the cloud, because ultimately the data owner is on the hook for a big breach fine cost.
Very true. Hector, do you want to start and I'll finish?
I think you have a slide on that, but it's a really good point and catch on that, because there's a lot of misunderstanding in the industry that encryption is a panacea. It's not. Security is a process, and it's one that has to be managed, measured, and reported on. So a lot of the tools that you're hearing about have been implemented by the people at the table, some of the people in the room. That's the reason they did it. But one of the other things that is inherent in those products is encryption in transit. It is encryption at rest. But something else, when you're working with cloud services and cloud service providers, a few years ago, the CTO of the Office of the National Coordinator came out with a statement that your cloud providers should be business associates. A lot of IT vendors don't realize they need to take on the business associate persona and help a covered entity understand what they do to protect their data. So I don't talk about de-identified and anonymized data because that happens a lot with studies and stuff, and that's part of the data. But there is that secure chain of custody that you have to establish from end to end. And again, encryption at rest, encryption at transit are two key things that you should be doing. You should be making sure it's happening at the app level. You should be making sure that your apps are being managed. If you're really going to win over your CISO, you have to show that CISO an end-to-end secure chain of custody for your data, because you're absolutely right. It comes down to the data and how that is traversing the organization, going out and coming back in. The other thing, and I'll just give you a real example on here, we're working with some hospitals that do e-consultations with the Mayo Clinic, and the Mayo Clinic has some of the best specialists in the world, so you want them to look at your x-rays and your medical records. You want them to be your Dr. House, your experts. And what they've done, though, is the only way we got this done was by encrypting everything from the very beginning, adding rights management services to the data, so then after the doctors were done looking at that information, it actually would expire. So they couldn't keep it, because that's one of the other things that happens is we're finding a lot of old databases that security people are coming back to us and going, oh, we didn't know that database was still around. Well, what if you could expire it? What if you could put a timeout on it? So that's really important that you do dig deep into your security architecture, your data security architecture, and understand where your data is at all times, what it's doing, who's doing it, and if it shouldn't be there, get rid of it. So, excellent question.
2014, disclosure of data was over 80% due to hacking. 2015, about 50% of disclosure of data was accidental release. So using things like rights management to make sure that the data is protected wherever it stands, but also you can expire it, like Hector mentioned, is a great way of doing that to protect your data, whether on-premise, in cloud, or in transit. So it does, hopefully that helps address your question. Do you have anything else on that? And then service levels, we do provide financial backed service levels. Right now we have 99.5, sometimes up to 99.9, depending on where you want to go. And we can actually go higher than that depending on what you want to do. So we can talk more about that in depth if that's a business requirement. And our BAAs, again, we also have other certifications out there that protect that. I have about 5 minutes left. I'd love to have another audience question. Yes?
Well, very simple in question. When you talked at the very beginning about credentials and using passwords, is there kind of a more aggressive way to be proactive in doing that on a regular basis, whether it's quarterly that you change it, having a specific methodology and how you do it based on more characters and more symbols versus numbers, and what would you suggest for that?
So I'm not trying to sound like a Microsoft commercial, so I'm going to go very, very basic, and then from there you can adapt. How's that? My recommendation is obviously make sure you educate your users not to use their Facebook password as their domain credential. Again, the Verizon breach report talked about 66% of all people that had breached accounts had the same personal and corporate account password. So if you can teach your users not to do that. Second thing is obviously have a password change policy. We heard the CISO from Scripps today talk about how a vendor pushed them from 90 days down to 60 days. So whatever your partners and vendors are recommending, I would suggest that if you're a CISO that you would define here's what the standard is and make sure you have good policies. We've documented what best practices are based upon Microsoft learnings, but you could take that and build upon that as well. Whether it's symbols, text, characters, it's funny. When you log into banks and other things, they ask you if you want to do a personal secret question identity. I've actually changed it to phrases. So the thing I have on mine is, what are you wearing? There's no way you can guess what I had at that time. And it's not what I'm wearing either, by the way. It's a phrase. But knowing that, they don't know. They can't look me up on Facebook or social media and figure out, oh, my pet's name is Fluffy. I was married here and those sort of things. So teach your users not to use characters that are easily breached through dictionary attacks, but use phrases and other things like that too. And it's a lot easier to remember. Okay. Did I address your question? Thank you very much. I think we have about 2 minutes left. Is there any other questions, comments? Yeah, one more.
So this is a risk question. There are compelling reasons to go into cloud, and there will be more compelling reasons to go in the cloud as cloud grows security controls. So one of the problem with the cloud is the all eggs in the same basket type of problem, where your data is in the custody of another entity, and that entity has to maintain certain controls. So if that entity doesn't maintain controls well, like what, for example, happened with Microsoft Office 365 about a month ago, where they discovered that SSO doesn't work and anybody can go to any large company's account that uses SSO. To Microsoft's credit, it was fixed within 8 hours, but problems like that will happen. So what type of consideration do you have in mind when you address that particular risk? Because it will never go away.
And I'd argue that risk is whether you're on-premise or in cloud. It's the controls that you have in place and how you manage it. This is a brief slide about why Microsoft on things. We invest billions to do security. And we have red teams that go out and try to breach in every single day. We have blue teams that are dedicated. And it's hard, many customers out in the audience, I bet you can't say that you have 10 people dedicated to a red team today. We have hundreds dedicated to a red team. And we have people looking for these things. Back to your point, I'm not aware of the Office 365 specific incident you just mentioned, but again, the controls that are in place, we are controlled and we have compliance against things like FedRAMP Moderate, which is basically a very high security piece of it, all the way down to various different agencies outside. So I think we do a good job of making sure we protect your interest. We also have the financial wherewithal to do it, whereas other companies may not have it. So that's why putting your eggs in our basket, to use your analogy, I think is a good risk mitigation, and also it's a shared responsibility. So yes, you're working with Microsoft, but if you release all your emails because you don't have the good controls in place, I can't help and control that.
So just one real quick comment on that, Peter, is healthcare is a hybrid world. The end state is the hybrid, so not everything's going to be in the cloud. So just when you're architecting for that end state, architect for the hybrid, keep your mission-critical, life-saving data close to you. Go to the cloud with workloads. At Microsoft, we started with low business impact, medium, high. We do have our high business impact data in the cloud, but that did not go first. It took a few years to get that there.
Well, as always, we are on the clock with experts with more to share. Then I bet we could keep them forever. But the good news is that I bet we could, if we give them a really nice round of applause, that they'll come back again. Thank you all very much. And Peter, thanks for the excellent job.
Thank you.